All right, and welcome back to the Pearl Snap Tactical Podcast, the show that gives you the tips and tools you need to make yourself stronger, faster, and harder to kill. My guest today is the mighty John Michael Greer. He's been on the show before, a returning champion. He's an author, researcher, and one of the sharpest minds out there when it comes to civilizational decline, the role of tradition, and deeper patterns that shape history, and much, much more. So, guys, if you recall our last episode, and many of you told me this was one of the most eye-opening conversations you'd heard before, but today we're going to go even deeper into that. Today we're going to talk about myth, not myths as in fairy tales or bedtime stories, but we're going to talk about myth as something older, something more powerful and practical than most people realize. For those of us in the military or law enforcement or just people that are just trying to live that warrior mindset or develop it, and understanding deeper structures that are found within myth are not optional anymore. It's really essential because myths tell you who you are. It tells you what you're fighting for and how to endure when the institutions fail and the world stops making sense. So today I'm going to be talking to John, and I'm going to ask him, we're going to talk about what myth is, but then more importantly, we're going to talk about how do you live it? How do you live the myth? Not just reading it or just watching some adaptation on Netflix, but how do you really live it? And how do we tell the difference between real myths that give us strength as opposed to the fake ones that were pushed onto us by modernity that will just as well lead us off a cliff? And we're going to talk about what does the Grail legend of all things have to teach the modern warrior? So join with me today is the most lethal druid in the New England area. I welcome John Michael Greer to the show. John, how are you, sir?
I'm doing very well, thank you. Pleasure to be on again.
It is good to have you back, man. I'm really glad and excited that you decided to come back. I think I told you offline that your episode with us is one of the highest. No, it is to date the highest downloaded episode we've had to date. So that's pretty
Sweet.
cool.
And yet I don't think I passed on a single piece of information on like tactical firearms use. Not that I'm not that I'm particularly qualified in that field. I mean, probably most of our listeners know more about that subject than I do.
Yeah. Well, I think that's what's so cool about it is because, we'll have several episodes on low light and close quarter battles and tactics and stuff like that. And then John Michael Greer comes on and it's like, boom. I mean, it just exploded. So I think that's really cool. And I think, I think it also really speaks highly to you and your skill set and knowledge that you were able to say something that people really found valuable, in that crowd.
I'm
really
certainly
excited.
glad that they found it valuable. I'm certainly glad that, to say something useful to people who are potentially going to be on the sharp edge of things as our civilization continues stumbling toward its self-inflicted end.
Yeah, for sure. Well, let's just get on to it, shall we?
Okay, let's do it.
All right. Well, let's start with the basics. So we're talking about myths, and what I want to know is give me your definition of a myth and then follow it up by why would someone in the military or law enforcement or just some security-minded citizen, why do they need to avail themselves of myths?
Okay. I'm going to start with the word itself because, as with so many pieces of terminology in modern life, it's gotten distorted, it's gotten misused. The ancient Greek word mythos, literally means narrative, story. Originally, it was just a term for a story. Then it became used as the term for the stories that mattered, the stories that tell people who they are, what's going on in the world, not in any factual sense. Okay, you don't turn to myths to get the same kind of information you would turn to a manual or an instructional book. Celestius, who was a classical philosopher fairly late in the history of the ancient world, wrote that myths are things that never happened but always are. Okay, they're things that they're not accounts of what happened, they're accounts of what is. They express patterns that are universally human, whether we're talking about hero myths such as Beowulf, okay, whether we're talking some of the many other kinds of myths that are out there. These are exploring permanent human possibilities, things that we can all experience, things, challenges that we may all face.
Hmm.
We may not, as Beowulf, be facing, a gigantic cannibalistic monster who comes, breaking in the door in the middle of the night to bite the heads off of several stout Vikings. But there are some equivalents in everyday life that are not altogether that different from that, and in which the same kind of courage and cool-headedness and total commitment and strength that Beowulf demonstrated are exactly the right thing. And if you know the story, if you've not just skimmed over it, but gotten into it, that's a resource for you. You can think, oh crap, here comes Grendel, and be ready to do something about it.
Yeah.
And so, go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. Go on. I'm sorry.
No, that's fine. It's just that the myth is an underrated resource, and that's, to some extent, that's deliberate. In the modern world, we've had this manufactured notion that myths are things that aren't true. Myths are, people use the term myth for like the idea that touching a toad will give you warts. It's a myth. Generally anything that the corporate scientific establishment doesn't like, it's a myth. Well, in some cases, maybe it is. In some cases, there may be something to be learned from those stories too. But generally speaking, there's been a lot of focus on getting people not to pay attention to stories, getting people not to pay attention to narratives. I'm going to tiptoe onto some slightly edgy ground here and point out that, the narratives of every religion are mythoi, myths in the old sense. We're not talking about things that aren't true, but simply in the stories that matter. I would imagine that for all of our Christian listeners right now, there's a certain story that's told in the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John that is really, really important. Okay, and in the old sense, that's a myth, and it's a myth to live by and a myth to learn from. And even those people who don't happen to be Christian can learn some things from it.
Yeah.
So to teach, I want just if our listeners can do one thing during this conversation, keep in mind the word myth simply means an important story, a story that tells something essential about human existence. It does not mean a story that's not true. Quite the opposite.
Yeah.
Okay. Keep that in mind, and you will be much less confused as we proceed.
Yes. Good call there. And I think for me personally, what I found out as I've kind of been delving into these things over the years is that especially these ancient myths it's like they're telling a story that we can all understand, right? Jack took some beans and Jack threw them on the ground, and this beanstalk goes up or whatever, and it's like, yeah, we can see that, but then there's also symbols that are embedded within the stories, and it almost seems like you'll be much more articulate on what I'm trying to say, but that it speaks to a higher form of being within our souls that sometimes we don't even recognize as being spoken to. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah. Yeah, the thing is, most of us operate on the absolute surface of our minds most of the time. If our minds were lakes, we'd be casting our hooks, casting our hooks about 2 inches below the surface. And there's a lot of tasty fish much deeper, but we never put our hooks down there. Myths, fables, the stories that matter are meant to get us to put our hooks deep.
Yeah. Yes.
And so they encourage us to think, because the thing is, if you know these old stories, especially if you grew up with them, we'll be getting to that in a bit. I have a canned rant for all of our listeners who have children, which we'll get to in a good time. But especially if you grew up with them, you encounter one of these basic human situations. You have some stories, and you have a resource that other people don't have.
Yeah.
You have a way to think about them. The crucial thing here, and this is something that's really that's forgotten, I think, far too often, human beings think with stories. Stories are our basic tools for thinking. We try to say, okay, how does this fit? Here's this thing that happens. Here's that thing that happens. Here's the other thing that happened. How do they connect? We connect them with a story. And it may be an appropriate story. It may be a wrong story. It may be we may make a complete hash of things.
Mm-hmm.
Figuring out that, or trying to think that, well, this woman did this and she did this and she's that, and oh wow, she's like hot for me. Well, she's not. She was just being friendly. But so we've got the wrong story.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so, but if you know some stories, especially if you know stories that were not cobbled together by corporate interests in the last few years to push some agenda, if you know the old stories, you're more likely, as you look at the pieces, to say, "Oh, I know which story this is telling.
Mm-hmm.
I know.
Mm-hmm.
I recognize this pattern. I recognize this narrative, and that capacity for pattern recognition can put you a hop, leap, and jump ahead of those people who don't have that advantage."
Yeah. I did a episode, man, it was a few months ago. It was a solo
Mm-hmm.
episode where I kind of did one basically sketching out Joseph Campbell's hero
Mm-hmm.
myth, the hero's
Mm-hmm.
journey. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm not. I've read a couple books by Joseph Campbell, and I mean, I like him. I think he has some pretty cool stuff to
Mm-hmm.
say. But I think, there's no question he's a materialist at heart, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so,
Mm-hmm.
oftentimes he does love myths, he does appreciate them, but I think he falls short of really
Mm-hmm.
appreciating it or helping us to appreciate it on a more
Yeah.
metaphysical level, because it
Uh-huh.
just seems like he keeps it on the profane. And when I say profane, I don't mean
Mm-hmm.
sacrilegious. I mean it kind of in
No.
the Mercia Iliada sense, of
Yeah.
a
He keeps it in that first 2 inches of the lake. He
yes.
doesn't go into the deep waters. Well, the thing to keep in mind is the guy was an English professor
Yeah.
at a university. Okay, so
Yeah.
and that kind of structures what he was doing.
Yes.
There you get all of this fixation on the monomyth, the idea that you can plug every myth into this one sort of hero's journey, which is simply not true.
Right.
It is a pattern that definitely exists many times in many stories,
Hmm.
but it's not the only game in town.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And yeah, but it is interesting though, and I did make, I don't know if I did that in an interview with someone else or if I said it in that episode, but
Mm-hmm.
it does, you say patterns. Once you start reading these things, you
Mm-hmm.
you do start seeing these patterns within these stories
Uh-huh.
and you recognize them, and it's a formula that works almost like on a biological level.
Oh
And
yeah.
when the stories don't have that, they might be entertaining, but it's like I
Mm-hmm.
said, that's why 100 years from now people will still be reading J.R. Tolkien,
Mm-hmm.
but we will have forgotten about Game of Thrones. You know what I mean? Like, cool
I
story,
hope so.
bro. I mean,
Yeah,
it was a good
but
story, but it
but
pales in comparison to, Lord of the Rings.
yeah.
But
Well, Tolkien soaked himself in archaic myth. This is
hmm
a guy who was so deeply in love with myth. He learned Finnish as a teenager. And Finnish is a difficult language. It's one of the
yeah,
hardest languages for anybody who speaks an Indo-European language like ours to learn. But he learned to read Finnish because he'd read the Kalevala, the collection of Finnish myths, and he wanted to read them in the original.
wow,
Now, this is Tolkien. He's the kind of the uber language geek,
yeah,
but still, you get an idea of how passionately fond he was
yeah,
of the old mythologies, the Norse mythologies, the Germanic mythologies, the Celtic mythologies, the Finnish stuff. He was just crazy about that stuff,
yeah,
and that flowed into his writing.
hmm
And it really helped shape. There are some things that he did that were not really in keeping with the old myth, but he had reasons for that.
yeah.
And it doesn't change the fact that the Lord of the Rings really shaped the consciousness of the modern world and to an amazing degree.
Yes. Yeah, I agree. I agree. Well, I do want to get into some of these myths, like
Mm-hmm.
especially the Grail legends. But before I
Mm-hmm.
do, still kind of keeping at it at a 30,000 foot view, I'll say, from my perspective, and I kind of said this in the intro, that I believe that myths are meant to be lived, not just studied,
Mm-hmm.
right? That's
Mm-hmm.
the ultimate purpose of them, is to live them. So
Mm-hmm.
how can someone, as they go back to the Iliad, Beowulf, or some of
Mm-hmm.
these other stories, how can they begin to, I don't know, operationalize these myths, if I
Okay.
use the military term,
No, that's
in
a
our
perfectly
world?
good term. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the first thing to do is don't study them. Okay. We
Mm.
study with that surface layer of our mind. We analyze, we pick apart, soak yourself in them,
Mm. Yeah.
dive into them,
Yeah.
and you got to. I want you to imagine. I want our listeners to imagine where these stories were originally being told. Okay, you're hearing Beowulf. Okay,
Mhm.
the guy who just wrote it is on the other side of the fire. You're sitting in an Anglo-Saxon hall, and this guy is declaiming, and there's a guy next to him who's playing notes on the Saxon lyre, and it's long, it's
Mhm.
hypnotic. You're
Mm.
sitting there. It's been a long day. You were up
Yeah.
there fighting the guys from the next village and this kind of stuff. And this guy is telling this story about Grendel and what have you.
Yeah.
And so you're going to be into it.
Yeah.
This is like campfire stories when you're 7 years old and the fire is crackling and somebody's really good at like telling a ghost story, and the shivers are going up and down your spine.
Mm.
Okay, that's the natural environment of stories like this. It's not, sitting in the study and looking through the thing and saying, I wonder which Anglo-Saxon verb that translates or anything like that. It's the point is to dive into them and just let yourself soak in them.
Yeah.
And then the thing to do is when you're confronting a situation, say, do I know a story that corresponds to this?
Mm.
Which of the myths does this remind me of?
Mhm.
Or you may just find, especially if you really soaked yourselves and if you've really gotten into it, you're going, yeah, it's Grendel coming through the door, okay,
Yeah.
or what have you.
Yeah.
You see, it's a matter. A lot of this, we need to be able to get below that top 2 inches of the lake. We need to get below the conscious mind into the deep places,
Mhm.
and stories will do that. I
Mhm.
mean, most people have had this. Some of us remember when we were 3 and 4 years old, and we were going to be put down for our nap,
Mhm.
and it had to be the same story every
Mhm.
single day until our parents were practically going mad because they did not want. But we
Yeah.
had to have that same story. That's
Yeah.
the natural environment of myth, and
Yeah.
because that story endlessly repeated, it's a patterning process, and it
Mm.
goes below the conscious level.
Mm. To where it becomes a
So
part of you
it
almost.
becomes a part of you,
Yeah.
very much so. And so, yeah, if you're there you are kicking back in your sofa,
Mm.
and it's July, so the air conditioner is desperately struggling to try to keep to keep the air from turning into a soup, and you have a beer and you're reading some Beowulf, okay. Try to put yourself into it.
Mm.
Don't stay outside. Don't go, I wonder what that's supposed to be. Just let yourself get into the story. Let yourself sink into it the way you do when you're reading a novel you really like.
Mhm.
And you literally, Grendel and his 15 cousins could walk across the other end of the room and you would not see them because you're so focused on the novel. Try
Yeah.
to get that sort of state, because that's also the kind of natural habitat of this kind of story, and that will build that pattern, especially if you read it more than once,
Yeah.
especially if you make it a habit. Take the ones that matter. Well, personal confession here. When I was a geeky teenager, I don't even know how many times I read The Lord of the Rings.
Yeah. Yeah.
Dozens.
Mhm.
I would read it, and I'd get to the end where just before the final, where Frodo was remembering things that happened back in the first part. I had this sudden passion to go back and start it over again. So I'd finish it and go right back to the beginning.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that kind of geeky obsession is a good thing to cultivate with this kind of thing, because it leads to that enriching of the depths of the mind with the resources of stories.
Hmm.
Um, this is the place where I'm going to put in my canned rant for the benefit of all of our listeners who have kids. Okay,
Please
okay.
do.
Right,
Please.
right now the world is full of pallid little children's stories making pallid little points, and they're all cute and they're all harmless and they're all dreadfully dull. Please don't inflict that crap on your children.
Yeah.
Get some old-fashioned fairy tales. Yes, Grimm, and the Brothers Grimm deserve their name. Okay,
Yeah.
the Brothers Grimm are grim.
Yeah.
Kids adore that cannibalism. There's this wicked witch who is going to eat you up. Kids love that kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
Don't try to shield them from it. That's going to help them come to terms with the realities of existence, where there may not be wicked witches out there wanting to gobble them up, but there are plenty of corporations who will happily do it.
Yeah,
Given the choice,
exactly. Yeah.
given the choice, the wicked witch is probably going to be kinder too.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Yeah.
so give them the real thing. We've got Grimm's fairy tales. We've got Perrault's fairy tales. Give them Puss in Boots and the original thing, not the horrible plastic Disney-fied,
Yeah.
crock of crap.
Yeah.
Um, always, 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 find books for your kids that were written before your parents were born.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And just if you want, especially if you want to avoid, or you want to help keep them from being vulnerable to some of the nastier features of contemporary life, give them the older books. And
Yeah.
so and tell them those bedtime stories full of wicked witches and ogres and things like that. They will eat it up.
Yeah. Well, and it goes back to the point we said earlier about the symbology, especially in these
Yeah.
older stories, like that it means something. And even when you come across something that seems harsh or even shocking to the conscience, that's your cue to pay closer attention to it, because there's something there that's trying to get at you. And yeah. This is kind of a side tangent, but I was reading I think an ancient Roman named Sallust, who wrote a little treatise on the gods, and he was saying, because you see a lot of you got a lot of saucy stuff going on in the Greek and Roman myths with gods, and you've got Zeus sleeping with everything he can get his hands on, and
if it has two legs, he's probably sleeping with it.
Yeah, it probably is. And on one hand, the critics will say, "Oh, these gods are so immoral and everything like that." But it's like, they're confusing the myth with the religion, and they're not the same thing. And Sallust was even saying, "No, the gods are good. The gods are perfect. They're moral." But when these are stories designed to teach us things, so when you see something like that is taboo in our society, it is trying to get you to pay attention to something deeper.
It's to make you stop.
Yes.
Exactly. To make you stop and say, whoa, what is going on here? Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so, and the thing is, on the one hand, that's true of fairy tales also. On the other hand, let us remember that that children are being raised right now in a crumbling society that's already in a steep decline and is heading for a dark age.
Yeah.
The sooner they realize that the world is full of dangerous things, the better. And if they learn it by way of old-fashioned fairy tales that have, quote, dangerous things they don't actually have to deal with. I mean, kids will pick up pretty quickly that there are not a lot of wicked witches around there building gingerbread houses to cook them in.
Yeah.
But, if they grow up with this sense that the world is not this kind of pastel My Little Pony place where nothing ever bad happens to anybody, frankly, that's going to make smarter, cagier, safer kids.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
I agree.
Don't try to shield them. And
I agree. I agree.
Here again, what Sallust said about Greek myths. If you read the Old Testament, there's some pretty robust stuff in that. Okay. Yeah. And so here again, there are a lot of the old Christian writers would say, if you see something, you're going, hold it. Why did God do that? That doesn't make sense. Stop.
Yeah.
Something's being communicated there. So just a little hint for this. I knew an old woman many years ago who one of her I think really her main spiritual practice was to read a chapter of the Bible a day, and we used to talk about that and some other things. And that's what she said. If you come across something that doesn't make sense to you, stop. It's there for a reason.
Yeah.
Don't just skip over it.
Yeah.
Think about it. Pray about it.
Yeah.
And see, you will learn some amazing stuff that way. So
yeah.
that's
Agreed.
a little bit of additional advice on very, very important narratives.
Yeah.
So
let's, if I can, let's pivot. Let's go ahead and get into some of them, and I would like to I know you're versed on several different ones, and I'm game to
Mm-hmm.
talk about as many as you'd like. But I'd like to start off with
Okay.
the Grail legends, and
Let's
note
talk about
that
the Grail.
I didn't start out saying Holy Grail because I actually had a guest, Jake Furvish, who
Mm-hmm.
last year, who is pretty deep into the Grail myths, and we kind of started out with the
Mm-hmm.
pre-Christian origins of
Uh-huh.
the Grail myths, and
Mm-hmm.
into once the advent of Christianity and the chivalric orders. But the
Mm-hmm.
Grail myths have been really a mainstay for warrior societies. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
we really don't know how old it goes back, but
Mm-hmm.
but if you would, it's very important in the Western tradition. But can you kind of walk us through? And I know this is kind of hard because it's such a deep myth,
Sure.
but if you can kind of
Sure.
hit the high points
let's
of
let's let's
the
let's
Grail.
talk let's talk about the basics, the kind of basic generic early Grail myths, because like every one of the Arthurian legends, this one took on different shapes as different authors got to work on it.
Yeah.
But we can take the early version, the version that shows up in Chrétien de Troyes, that shows up in Wolfram von Eschenbach, the important early writers of the Grail stories. So we start out with a young man who is a complete idiot. Okay, he doesn't even know what his name is. Okay,
Yeah.
he's been raised by his mom off in the middle of the woods somewhere. And his father had been killed in a battle, and all of his older brothers had been slaughtered in the same battle. It was not a pretty situation. And so she had fled. She was a noblewoman, but she fled off into the woods and raised her last remaining child just totally coddled,
Mm.
totally isolated from the world. And he became, he happened was fortunately he did not end up as one of these cream puff types. He was strong and full of energy and this kind of stuff. And so he's kind of hanging around on the out near the borders of their property. And along comes these figures in shining armor on horses, and he's never heard of a knight. Okay, he thinks they're angels
Yeah. Yeah.
because he knows about angels. He was raised Christian, so he knows about angels, and so he's going, my God, these are angels. And they clarify that no, they're knights, and they explain what they're doing, and they go galloping on. He decides, okay, heck with this, I'm going to go become a knight, and he leaves home.
Hmm.
He just up and leaves home right then, and leaving his mother to die of a broken heart as it happens. But so he goes riding off, and the various adventures happen to him, and he finally comes to King Arthur's castle. And a lot of the people at King Arthur's castle are going, this guy's a complete idiot. Not only that, he's a hick from the sticks. He knows absolutely nothing. But King Arthur realizes, yeah, well, that may be the case, but he's also tougher and stronger, and this big brawny kid. Okay, kid, you need to go off and you need to accomplish some noble deeds before I will make you a knight. And Percival,
Hmm.
he goes, he doesn't know his name yet, but he goes, oh, okay, that makes sense. So he goes off and starts doing it. He runs into an old guy named Gurnemans, who sits him down and gives him some basic instructions. And one thing leads to another, and then he's going off on this quest, and finally he comes to this castle. Okay, and he comes to this castle, and it's the getting on toward evening. He's been riding for days through this complete desolation. The land looks like it's been nuked.
Hmm.
Nothing grows. There's no water. There's nothing. But then there's this castle by this pool, and he reaches the castle, and it turns out it's inhabited, and they welcome him in, and greet him appropriately, and take off his armor and all this kind of stuff, and get him and take him to the to introduce him to the lord of the manor, who is a king, who is in fact the Fisher King of the Grail legends, and who is wounded,
Hmm.
and it's a wound that will not heal. And there they are sitting at the thing, and then everything goes dead quiet. And a procession comes in one after another. These various, a couple of pages with candles and various other things, and then one page carrying a spear, which is a stream of blood permanently trickling from the point, and another page. Actually, no, it's a woman at this point bringing the Grail. Now, what is the Grail? We'll get to that. And all this happened, but you see, one of the pieces of advice that Parzival got from Gurnemans, got from the old man, is don't ask too many questions. So he doesn't ask any questions. He doesn't say, what's all this about? And so all that happens, the feast happens, and he gets shown to a bedroom for the night, nice, luxurious place. He falls asleep, and he wakes up the next morning, and the castle is empty. There's
Mm.
nobody in it. And he searches around. He finds his armor. He finds his horse. He rides, finally, just completely baffled, he rides out, across the drawbridge, and all of a sudden the drawbridge slams up behind him. And he realizes, oh, something is up. And so he goes on a little ways, and he finds, this usual thing. If you're on a nightly quest, you can expect to find somebody who will explain to you what you should have done after it's too late. And this is a woman who is the ugliest woman in the world, by the way. And she says, you are a moron. We already knew that, didn't we? But you're a complete moron. If you had asked the Fisher King, what's all this about? What is this Grail thing? Then he would have been healed, and the land would have been healed. And now it's going to take you a long, long time of searching before you can find that castle again and ask the question. And now Parzival is going, what? Come on, I know where I came. He tries to find it. Of course, no luck. The road doesn't take him any place he recognizes. More adventures happen, lots of adventures until he finally does return and asks the right question. And then not only does the king heal, the land is healed, but Parzival then becomes the new king of the Grail Castle. Okay, so that's that's the really simplified version of the Grail story. And there again, you can get various versions of it.
Yeah,
that's the early version. Now, if you are thinking you should have been hearing about Galahad, that's the second version, and that's the explicitly Christian version. And if you read Sir Thomas Malory, you read the later stuff, what happened was the older kind of semi-pagan version of it got rewritten by Christian monks in around 1250 or so. And they started coming out with their own versions, which were completely rewritten to replace some aspects that they thought were a little too pagan and make it very, very, very Catholic.
Right.
And so that's when Galahad came in.
Yeah.
That Galahad whose strength is in his purity, and who finds the Grail and drops dead and is literally hauled directly to heaven by angels. Okay.
Yeah.
So, if that's the kind of Grail story you want, get Sir Thomas Malory is your friend. He has that. And of course, there's a bunch of other good ones. But if you're if you prefer something a little more archaic, Wolfram von Eschenbach, Parzival, there are several very good English translations of that. And it's worth your while.
Yeah, so I haven't started on those yet, but let me back up a little bit, because there's a couple things. So, especially when you went through the Parzival story, I'm just thinking in my head, dang, man, there's a lot of symbols there. There's a lot going on there. And I could also hear myself, an earlier version of me before I had ever really kind of gotten into this stuff, listening to that story and be like, okay, well, that's a cool story, but maybe I should go watch Jason Bourne or James Bond or something, like, like, what's the big deal? But the whole point is the symbology that are in there. So for someone who's new at reading this, I certainly don't expect you to unpack all of the symbols there, because part of that is for the searcher, right? That's part of the reward, right? You have to dig it out on your own. But to get someone started, but before I ask you to just maybe shed the light on a few symbols there, let me start by something a little bit more mundane and practical from someone who's new to it. Like, they're reading it and they're like, okay, cool story. Why does this matter to me?
Well, that depends on, again, whether you're willing to get into the story and start looking at it as a template, as a narrative that might tell you. We have all been absolute morons.
Yes.
Okay. I mean, when I was a teenager, I certainly was. We've all been there.
Yeah.
And we all know what it's like to come into a new situation and find out that we're completely out of our depth. And half the people in the room are saying, who is this dork?
Yeah.
And maybe there's someone saying, okay, you can prove yourself. Now, if you remember that that's what happened with Parzival, You go, oh, okay, I just need to go prove myself, and then King Arthur will dub me. Okay. Otherwise, your ego will get in the way, and you may spoil a perfectly good opportunity. That's a really simple example,
Mm-hmm.
but I can think of situations in my early life when having that well in mind would have spared me some embarrassment.
Oh yeah.
Um, and there's also the marvelous thing, one of the greatest things about the classic Grail story. It's all about knowing the right question to ask.
Hmm.
I mean, that's
Mm-hmm.
life.
Yeah.
If you know the right question, the answer is easy.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
getting to the once you have the right question, getting to the answer is easy. But to know the right question, if you have that in mind, um, I mean, think of 1,000 different situations in politics, in society, in business, in relationships. What do you need to know? You need to know what question to ask. You need to know what the real issue is,
Mm-hmm.
and you need to ask it.
Yeah.
And if
Yeah.
you have that in mind, somebody in government is doing something. Gosh, who would have thought this? Doing something sleazy, and you're looking at that. What's the question? Okay,
Yeah.
you need to ask questions about it. Okay, what is actually going on here?
Yeah.
One of the versions of the Grail question is, whom does the Grail serve?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and you can pick that one up and simply say, okay, who does this serve? Here
Mm-hmm.
is this project that's being pushed by so and so, and say, who does that actually help? Who does
Yeah.
that actually benefit?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
If you have that hardwired into your brain that that's the question that comes to mind, that will spare you a lot of grief and that will open a lot of doors.
Yeah.
So right there, isn't it a really good example of how a good story can give you the tools to kind of think your way through the
Yeah.
challenges of life.
Yeah.
So, and Parzival especially, Parzival, the Parzival story is great because it's all about how a young, strong, brave, and utterly clueless kid becomes one of the great heroes.
Mm-hmm.
It's all about growth and development, and where it's Wolfram describes it as the story of a brave man who slowly becomes wise.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so he starts out brave. He starts out, he's got guts. He just
Yeah.
doesn't have brains.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, that could be said of most of us. Those of us who actually have the guts.
Yeah.
How many of us have as much brain? How many of us have as much brains as we have guts?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
not gonna ask for any confessions here, but
Yeah.
I'm thinking of myself here and going, ooh, yeah.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I could yeah, I'm right there in the boat with you. Why
Yeah, yeah, exactly,
why do
exactly.
you
So yeah, there.
think or I'm sorry, why do you
No,
think
go
like
ahead.
especially, with the Grail, especially in the medieval period, well, and really before that, but there's all kinds of stories that were floating around there at the time, but it
Hmm.
seems like this
Hmm.
Grail, whether it's the Christian form or the pre-Christian form,
Hmm.
it was so captivating to
Oh
warriors.
yeah.
But there were other war stories out there, but why is this Grail
Hmm.
thing so powerful, especially for those on the warrior path?
Um, I think partly because it was about a brave man slowly getting a clue.
Mm,
Partly, and it's about this process of development, this process of starting out, young, strong, brave, and stupid,
mm-hmm,
and figuring out step by step. So any of us, anyone who's been through that kind of upbringing, that kind of training, can sympathize with it. You're
mm-hmm.
not just dealing, here is Achilles, okay,
Yeah.
in the Iliad. By the time he comes onto the stage, he's already, death in bronze armor.
Yep. Yes.
He is this immense force of nature, and his story is a wonderful one, and it has enormous amount to teach. But you don't have the experience of somebody who starts out as a complete buffoon
Mm-hmm.
and becomes one of the greatest knights of the Round Table, step by painful step. So that appeals,
Yeah.
and that I think means a lot to anybody. Some of the other legends that were really popular at the time, I'm thinking of some of the legend of Roland,
Mm,
who was one of Charlemagne's warriors.
mm-hmm,
So we're moving from Britain to France here. There was a whole cycle of stories around the court of Charlemagne, and
mm-hmm.
Roland was the greatest of those. And again, we have stories about his boyhood, we have stories about his early career, and so on. And those were wildly popular because, again, here you are, whether you are a a 40-year-old knight on the edge of retirement. You've been through it all, but you remember what it was like. Or you're 12 and you're
Yeah.
kind of nerving yourself up for your first joust, and you can go, yeah, Roland did this too. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's the fact that the story of the Grail is also a story of growth, of development, of coming to maturity, of coming to manhood.
Yeah.
Is, I think, one of the things that gives it such power. And coming to manhood in a situation where you're going to be fighting.
Yeah.
If you're a knight in the world of Arthurian legend, when you get on your horse and you got your spear, you got your sword, you got your shield, you got your armor, by the time if you do not run into somebody who's going to challenge you, by the time you get to where you're spending the night, either you're in the middle of the wasteland and everything's nuked and nobody lives there, or you're doing it wrong.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Okay. So yeah, it's a situation where combat is gonna happen. Combat is inevitable, and you are most in that kind of world, your most likely destiny is to get spitted by somebody's lance.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so for people who are growing up who are entering onto the warrior path, or who are in the warrior path, or who are facing, as we are, the twilight of an age of relative peace, and the coming of a far rougher and more dangerous age. These stories like this have a lot to say.
I agree. And especially, I like how you put the emphasis on, the young lad who may be brave, he may be strong, but he hasn't grown up yet. I think that's probably one of the crises of masculinity today. We have so many dudes in their 30s and 40s, maybe even beyond, that really have not grown up yet. And that's why I would recommend the Grail is a great place to launch off from, because you have the template on how to grow up, and we need people to grow up quick.
Yeah, and the thing is, you're fighting against the entire momentum of our society, which is trying to keep guys children.
Yeah, yeah.
Our society likes boys. It doesn't like boys. It doesn't like anything male. But if you're going to be male, it wants you juvenile and dependent and passive and weak.
Yeah.
And if you want to be something else, if you want to achieve some kind of strength, if you want to achieve some kind of success in the world, you're going to have to rise to the challenge. I mean, the knight that's going to come galloping out toward you. Okay, his shield is a television screen.
Yeah.
And so the great opponent you're facing is the entire weight of corporate collective culture. And so joust with that puppy, knock him off his horse, and you're doing pretty well.
Yeah. I mean, certainly mightier than any dragon. I mean, for sure. Because it's just the weight. It's so prolific. Yeah. So I know. Let's talk. So we've talked about true myths, and what those are. Those are stories that are true. The primordial myths from antiquity and things like that. But
they never happened, but they always are.
But now there's counterfeit stories. There's counterfeit myths, right?
There's very these days. Good Lord! One of the reasons that I advised people to read things that were written before their parents were born, okay, is that so much of what gets churned out these days, it uses the trappings and the gimmicks and it's, if you will, it wears mythic drag. But it's not myth. Okay, it's not myth. No, seriously, we're talking kind of mythological drag queens here, who are parading around and in these mythic costumes. Oh, I'm so gorgeous. No, you're not.
Oh man, yeah, dude, you're straight on myth and drag. I love it. Yeah,
exactly. And well, I'm gonna beat up on one particular target here because it's such a perfect example.
Let's do it.
That's the Harry Potter. That's the Harry Potter books.
Yeah.
Those are bogus pseudo myths, and it's easy to figure out what they're pushing, what the agenda is behind it, because the basic story of the Harry Potter verse, okay, is that there are certain people who are special. They're
Yeah.
really, really special. And because they're special, they get to live in this marvelous world from which all the rest of us are excluded.
Yeah.
And they get to, most of them grow up in that world, but there's some people brought in from outside because they're picked because they're special. And they go through these special educational systems through from which, again, what we're talking about is the self-serving ideology of the modern laptop class.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
Okay, the managerial class that's currently losing its grip on the United States. That's their mythology. We're the special people. We have these. We're the talented ones. We're the ones who know what's really going on. Listen to the media, and you will hear that sung
Oh,
in
for sure.
every key. Oh, and it's
Yeah.
dreary,
Yeah.
and it's wrong.
Yeah.
Okay, just I'm going to those are our listeners who don't like the quote witchcraft stuff, which is not witchcraft, by the way, but you probably want to plug your ears for a moment. Okay, that's not even true of magic.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
it is not true that there are certain special people who have these wonderful magical gifts, and everyone else just has to lump it. That is not true.
Mm.
The talents that get called magic, which are not supernatural, by the way, they're entirely natural. Everybody has them. The
Yeah.
only difference between the people who actually develop them and the people who don't is who's willing to put in the hard work.
Yeah.
It's not that different from learning to shoot a pistol well or
Yeah.
something.
Yeah.
You
For
have
sure.
to just as a somebody who wants to get good with a firearm, you're going to have your butt down on the range,
Mm-hmm.
going
Yeah.
patink, 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 patink
Yeah.
over and over again until you get good at it. In the same way, working with the subtle aspects of the human mind, which is what we do in this thing called magic, that takes a lot of practice. It takes daily practice.
Yeah.
And that's all that it is. Nobody has talents. There are no special people.
Yeah.
And the same is true of the laptop class. They are, as we have seen, they're no brighter than the rest of us. In fact, when their heads are stuffed full of nonsense at university, they end up stupider.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
certainly make a lot of really bad decisions.
Yeah.
But that's a really good example of a toxic pseudomyth, because it's intended to teach people that this division, this class division between the laptop class and everyone else, is natural and justified and appropriate. Oh, don't you wish you were one of the special people? No.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
No, I don't.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, yeah. But one of the, go ahead.
Yeah. No. Go. Well, I was just going to say that, yeah, I can see that some of the myths, it does seem like, especially in modernity, that the role of the storytellers are really spellcasters. I mean, I'll call them that.
Yes.
Are, it's designed to make you a consumer, make you a spectator,
Make you
and I've
passive.
said to make
Exactly.
you passive, and to make you a spectator in your own life, or rather than the
Exactly.
creator of it.
Exactly. And so anytime you find, the whole special people business is all over the place.
Yeah.
Especially in children's fiction.
Yeah.
And for very tacky and toxic reasons, but it's all over the place.
Yeah.
As you look through all of these pseudomyths in drag, you look through all of these things, ask yourself, okay, what does this represent? What does this stand for? What is this story really about?
Yeah.
And do you really want your children to be absorbing that crap? There are many. If you want your kids to read fantasy fiction, there's a lot of good stuff that was written back before this stuff. The current thing. For heaven's sakes, pick up a copy of the Newbery Award winners from before, up to 1960. There's plenty of wonderful reading that will keep your kids absolutely delighted, fill their minds with fascinating, powerful, meaningful stories without the crap.
Yeah. Well, you talked about, so that laptop class thing with Harry Potter. I know on our last episode, we talked about the myth of progress. Is there any others that just spring to mind? Not to put you on the spot, but is there any other big ones?
There's the myth of progress. The idea that anything new is better than anything old, and that, here's this bright new idea, and now because I have this bright new idea, I'm going to win, and everyone else is going to, blah blah blah.
Yeah.
We have the myth of the special people.
Yeah.
We have various toxic myths around. If you're not quote diverse enough, you're bad.
Yeah. Yeah.
We have, we have the, I don't know if anyone even remembers these. I had brief accidental exposure to the old franchise of the Care Bears, which all focused, that was long ago, but it was all focused around the idea that, violence and nastiness, none of that's necessary. We can just all be sweet to each other. We can
Yeah.
all be passive and dependent and
Yeah.
infantile. That's
Yeah.
a myth too.
Yeah.
I don't, I'm sure I don't push that one too far because you know better.
Yeah.
That, but there are myths, there are myths of dependence. There are myths of infantilism that happiness comes from being totally dependent and passive and and infantile.
Yeah.
Those are the one I could. One of the, that's a good point. That's a good point. And one of the things I should do over the next weeks or so, because this will make a good blog post, is just think through what are the other popular pseudomyths right now. What are the toxic narratives being pushed by the corporate system onto people by way of pseudomyths and drag?
Yeah. Yeah. I'll be looking forward to reading that one when it comes out.
That's gonna take some work, but
Yeah.
So go on.
So let's move into something that I didn't put in the preamble, but it's something that is tied to a lot of these myths, especially warrior. Yeah, anybody you can't get past this one if you are seeing yourself on the warrior path, but that's the idea of initiation, like the warrior's initiation. What first of all, what does that word mean? I know in today's parlance we think initiation meaning you joined some fraternity or you got initiated at or onboarded at a job or something like that. But
yeah, exactly. Or or the absurd thing and in the movie Eyes Wide Shut or what have you. Yeah, all this kind of schlock.
Yeah.
The word initiation literally just means beginning.
Yeah.
To initiate something, is to put the initial on it, to start it, to initialize it. And so, initiations are traditionally how you begin something. In the war, I mean, I'm not a warrior, so to some extent, I'm talking out of my hat here. There are plenty of your guests who have been through that experience, as I have not, and who would actually have something to say on the subject. I'm worse. I'm reduced to working at secondhand from what I know from literature and from people that I know, vets and so on, who've been through that kind of experience. But yeah, there are various modes of initiation, just as in some other paths, there may be various degrees of initiation that you go through. In the warrior path, there's the moment where you actually commit to doing that, whether that involves, signing up for the military and going through the induction process, or whether it means going through law enforcement training or what have you. There's the various things, and then there's the initiation that comes when you're actually under fire.
Yes. Yeah.
When it's here we go. Button up your butt, and it's real now.
Yeah.
And so, that's I've had some conversations with some people who've been through that.
Yeah.
And nothing else will do that.
Yeah.
That's not something that you can't do that in a ceremony. It's
right.
It's the real thing, and there you are.
Yeah.
And there may be other modes beyond that, but in each case, you've got that transformation, you've got that phase change, that moment where you go from being a civilian to being a soldier or a sailor or what have you, or a law enforcement officer. You've taken the oath. You're in the life.
Yeah.
And nothing is ever quite the same. Or the moment where all of a sudden you realize you're under fire. The guys 300 yards away, on top of that hill, are trying to shoot you dead.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's real. Here you are. And that's something. Nothing is ever the same afterward. That's true of any real initiation.
Yeah.
You go through it. You go from one mode to another. We were talking about adulthood, and that's an initiation too. And most societies used to have, all societies except for some modern ones, have ways of marking that transition, and we've gotten rid of them in our society.
Yes.
Those of our readers, those are listeners, I should say, who are who belong to certain Christian churches will not like to hear this, but the old fraternal orders such as Freemasonry, the Oddfellows, or what have you, those really functioned in 19th and early 20th century America as initiations of manhood.
Mm-hmm.
That was something that a lot of young men would go to those, and they would go through the initiation, they would go through the ceremony, they'd be welcomed as a brother among a group of men. And it made a lot of difference. I mean, I've felt that myself when I had my first initiation into a men's lodge, and it was, whoa, okay, this is a different thing. And I've read plenty of accounts. I've talked to old guys. You talk to some 90-year-old guy who joined the Masons when he was 20, and he's been through it. 90 years old. The guy I'm particularly thinking of, he fought in the Second World War. He was active in a lot of things. He was active in his church. He was still going to the same church that he was married in, 70 years previously, and but when he was made a Mason, that was a real turning point. That was a real moment in his life. That, whoa, okay, and it makes a difference.
Yeah.
So there are these various options. I know there are these various groups that are trying to come up with manly initiations.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry to say, you can tell that most of them are being put together by well-meaning middle-class intellectuals.
Yeah.
And they've read a lot of Carl Jung. Well, I have nothing against Carl Jung. I have about 2 feet of Carl Jung on my bookshelf, for that matter. But you can read Carl Jung and, what's the thing from the old Eagles song? You can see the stars and still not see the light.
Yeah.
And it's actually pretty pallid.
Yeah.
So because again, it's somebody's brain fart, and that's fine. I see it as a sort of groping towards something that we haven't yet achieved. And I hope we do.
That's what I was going to say. I was going to say, when I see things like that, I mean, there's clearly, well, getting back to, like, societies used to have these initiations, to mark pivotal times in a man's life and in a woman's life too. And it was done by the community, and it was a tradition that was handed down. And it was that, that demarcation point. And we could just take, moving into adulthood, right? So that's a simple one. And it's not that at this moment, now you, like, through magic, became an adult. It was, now you are being recognized, and you are being now expected to live differttle, to act differently, and to assume responsibilities within the community.
You have the rights of an adult. You have the responsibilities of an adult. Suck it up, kid. You've arrived.
Yeah, exactly. And it's really hard to find that now. And you have that in the, in the military, there's aspects of that, but I'll tell you, really, just modernity has just taken a complete shit on that, and I don't know, I'm not sure why, because I don't think anyone is, I don't think there's some grand, 12 old dudes in a boardroom saying, yes, we're gonna, I don't think that, but it's it's in the zeitgeist, it's just in the way, and we're suffering for it, I think.
Yeah, this happens in aging societies. Okay, I'm going to use a very loaded term here, but it's an appropriate one. This happens in decadent societies.
Yeah,
they lose those anchors to the realities of life, the realities of birth and growth and maturity and death.
Yeah.
They hide. I mean, we hide birth away in hospitals. We hide death away in hospitals. We all, so many of us spend our lives trying to pretend that we're all 18 forever.
Yeah.
Which is incredibly stupid. I mean, my 18th year wasn't very fun. I'm just as happy to be long past it. But there's got, we flee from the realities, the gritty realities of life, into this fantasy world of Kens and Barbies.
Yeah.
And try to make this tacky plastic life. And that's normal for a decadent society. By the time Rome was in its latter years, the old rituals that were used, to welcome young men to manhood, those had all gone away.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it's this is what happens when a civilization is decadent, when a civilization is in decline, when it is tipping over the line that's leading from decline to fall.
Yeah.
And so the good news, if there is any, is that after the rubble starts bouncing, people tend to put things like that together fairly quickly again.
Yeah. Yeah. So that leads to the question. So until then, I kind of,
hmm
you can call it the Kali Yuga, or I call it the Wolf Age,
hmm
or whatever this age that we're living in. That's
I,
why I
I, sh-
think.
I shall I shall give it a new name and call it the time that sucks. Go ahead.
Yeah, that's a good one. That's a good one. Um, because you mentioned these guys that are doing these like man camps and shit like that.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, I see the sentiment. I'm not saying that there's zero value in it. Maybe for those who've not had those experience, I don't. I'm just skeptical of it, but I see because it's a symptom, right? It's the
Exactly.
it's the people within the society that are recognizing that we've lost something. So,
Yeah. hmm
to me, I think the only answer in this time is, we can't go back and recreate those societies. We're living in the society here and now. So
hmm
it's almost like it's left up to the individual to self initiate. Would you agree with
Yeah.
that?
Well, self-initiation is something we talk about quite a bit in the occult field,
Hmm.
and it's become necessary for a lot of us because there's a lot of the old occult organizations that have become very decadent and have all of their own problems and so on. So yeah, self-initiation is always an option. It is slower.
Hmm.
It's not something where you do a single ceremony and you're there. It's a
Yeah.
matter of changing your life a step at a time, and it routinely unfolds over years.
Yeah.
So, but that is an option. That is
Yeah.
something that we can do. And if that's if in the time that sucks, that's the option available to us,
Yeah.
then get on and get at it because nobody else is going to do it for you.
So then that would lead us to our next. I'm going to pose this question to you that I'm 99% sure no one has ever posed to you before in this way.
Okay.
So be ready. Here we go.
Okay. I'm ready.
So I got a question. This was from someone who came to several of my classes, gun tactical classes and stuff like
hmm
that,
hmm
and became a very good friend of mine. And he sent me an email one day, and I think it was after he had listened to a podcast or something, and he said, he goes, I wasn't in the military, I wasn't in law enforcement. He's like, but now what? He's like, he's a family man, he's a father, he's a good dude. He works
hmm
out, he hits the range, he does his dry fire practice, he does martial arts, the all thing, very gifted and super
hmm
talented guy. But he's saying, but there's that, and the only thing I can think of in my mind is like there's that aspect of initiation that is
hmm
missing. And how does one, and they don't have to be like in the warrior path, but just in life, like that's how do they self initiate? How does one go
That's
about that and have it feel
you see
legit?
that's the problem because you can only go so far on your own, and then you have to wait for, if you want to say God, if
Mm-hmm.
you want to say the universe, if whatever term you want to use for the powers that are beyond humanity.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, they have to answer.
Hmm.
You can only ask.
Hmm.
And so, and a lot of it, especially in a time like this, in a time that does suck, a lot of it is we can only do so much, and then we wait, and we may still be waiting when we die.
Hmm.
Okay, because this is, that's one of the things about this very difficult age of the world. It's an age where a lot of us have to go on our own, and we have there's no point where we can say, okay, I've achieved it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
There's no point where we get that pat on the head saying, okay, you have done what you need to do. We may never know.
Hmm.
All we can do is, it's, and I'm gonna go back to Beowulf here
Mm-hmm.
because there was no point in Beowulf's life where he could just stop. There
Right.
was no point where you say, okay, I'm achieved. He's an old man.
Yeah.
Somebody steals something from the dragon's lair, and the dragon comes out, and guess what? It's on him.
Mm-hmm.
He's an old man, but he's still the king of the, he's still the king. It's his job to take on that dragon. And he fights the dragon and he dies.
Mm. The final
And
initiation.
the final initiation, I mean, that's the initiation that we will all receive sooner or later. It depends
Yeah.
on, do we want to face it bravely, or do we want to get dragged into it squalling like an infant?
Yeah.
But, there's no point where where Beowulf could say, okay, I've made it.
Yeah.
I've achieved.
Yeah.
He fights Grendel. He fights Grendel's mom. He becomes king, king of the Geats or what have you.
Mm-hmm.
And he's still waiting. He's waiting for that final call. And this is something you especially see in the old Germanic myths. Because they came out of the collapse of Rome. They came out of the collapse of a society like ours, and of a complex, decadent, insanely corrupt society like ours. And so they have that sense of, you're always on call.
Yeah.
You're always waiting.
Yeah.
And that's true. If you read the Norse myth, it's even true of the gods.
Yes.
They don't know when Ragnarok is going to happen. Just one of these days, they'll be in the middle of doing whatever they were, and they're going to hear the horn. The Heimdall is sounding, and that means, here come the giants. Here come everybody.
Yeah.
Grab your weapons. Sound the alarm. It's time.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that's an experience that, of course, people all over the ancient world had in real life.
Yeah.
Many cases over and over again, and many of them, that's how their lives ended. And so that's why that has the power that it does, and why it had the power then, because everybody knew.
Yeah.
That's the way life is.
Yeah.
So there is no way to. There's nothing that I can say that will amount to, okay, if you do this, then you'll arrive.
Yeah. Well, no,
we arrive in Norse terms when the Valkyrie comes and scoops up our ghost and says, okay, you're in.
Yeah.
Odin wants you.
That's really interesting. I really appreciate your take on that, because I think you can tell me what you think of this, but I think you're kind of helping me unlock that.
Sweet.
In a sense, because oftentimes, especially in these mythic stories with the warriors, the initiation oftentimes is an ordeal, right? Where you're tested. And so if
we're
death,
being tested.
Yeah, if death is the final initiation, then this whole period where you are struggling to completely, become, right, this thing, this I hate to say this, but god dang it, it's out there, and it does make sense in this situation, but to become the best version of yourself that you can be, to expand and to grow, then even that feeling that you're wrestling with is part of the initiation.
That's central to the initiation.
Yeah.
It's one of the principles that you find. I'm going to borrow something from like the old Stoics, some of the old Stoic philosophers. You have this ideal. You will never achieve the ideal. You can't, but you can always aim for it.
Yeah.
You can always keep trying, and because you choose that ideal, because you aim high, you'll achieve things that you would have never believed you could achieve.
Yes.
If you just kind of gone trudging along ordinary life. So that's another aspect of the same thing. And the Stoics were dealing with the same kind of stuff.
Yeah.
That we are today. Again, another decadent, crumbling, dying imperial civilization.
Yeah.
Like some I could name.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, that's why having these myths and these stories to look at, and like you said, soak yourself in to where they become part of you so that you can live them, because you will replicate these patterns in your own life. It's not going to look exactly the same thing, but it's going to be the same pattern that you're replicating. And we saw that with, Napoleon emulated Caesar emulated Alexander the Great, and Alexander the Great tried to emulate Achilles, who probably wasn't even a real person, or was probably a conglomeration of people. But
yeah, exactly. A dim memory of somebody who fought on the side of the Achaeans because the sack of Troy apparently did happen. There's some archaeological, and there are some apparently a very few surviving scraps of a poem written by the other side.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just a couple of words here and there. And yeah, but yeah, and some dim folk memory of somebody who fought on the Achaean side, and then various poets got a hold of him and created Achilles. But they created an ideal, and
Yes.
this is again one of the reasons that real myths, even if the people never existed, are worthwhile. We talked about Tolkien earlier.
Mm-hmm.
Aragorn.
Mm-hmm.
You want an ideal?
Yeah.
Here's this guy who, as a kid, he had this, he was the last heir of the Dunedain, the last heir of the old kingdom of the north. He was also crazy in love with an elf woman who had no business, who was attracted to him, but her dad was saying no, not until you become an actual king, not just some guy roaming around the outside. And so he flung himself into this life where he was doing all kinds of spectacular things and toughened himself up and fought for the various causes and ending up running with Gandalf, which is a rough job right there. Ended up doing all of these things and eventually achieved his goal.
Yeah.
You could do a lot worse than to marinate yourself in the life of Aragorn, son of Arathorn. Read the scenes from Lord of the Rings and say, yeah, I want to be like that.
Yeah.
I want to be like that person, and see what happens. You will achieve more than you would if you just said, oh, I think I want to be like a Harry Potter character.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
No,
Yeah.
no.
So, okay, good. So, let me move on. We're about running out of time. I want to finish up on a couple more questions if you have a second.
Sure. Totally fine.
So, well, I think we've already hit this one that I had sketched out. Well, let me end it with this. So we're kind of going to circle back to the beginning then. So someone's listened to this and they're like, they've never read these stories, but they've heard the name Achilles. They've heard Beowulf or Sigurd, who we didn't even get, who's one of my favorites that we didn't even get into yet, or the Grail. But now they're starting to see this idea that they probably never thought of about myth being a tool now, a tool for your own developing strength and resiliency and your own growth. So what was the first, what's the practical steps you would lay out to somebody if they came to you and they're like, man, I read these things, I can't even understand them, because they're written in a different format, but like how to get started?
How do we get started with that? Okay, how we get started, first of all, I'd sit down with the person and find out what they like to read. And if they don't like to read, we'll find some other way around it and get them. But if they like, let's say they're really into Louis L'Amour. Okay, they're into Louis L'Amour westerns, and there's a guy who could write, by the way.
Yeah.
And okay, so we look at modern retellings of some of the old myths that are written in a way that a Louis L'Amour reader can enjoy. Those exist, especially for older kids, the young adult type things you can find, especially some of the older ones. You find something that will make sense to them, that will reach them where they are. You don't just throw them over, straight into, the Volsunga saga, which they have no way of making any sense of. You find one of the writers who has done a good job of taking that story and telling it. This is another reason why get your kids into this early. I was up to my eyeballs in Norse myth at about the age of 10, because at that time, now we're talking like 1972, okay? At that time, you could get children's books retelling all the old Norse legends. There was a guy named Padraig Colum, Colum, and Padraig spelled the Irish way. Padraig Colum wrote all of these amazing books of Irish and Norse mythology. And my school library had all of them. They had this line of them. I devoured those puppies. For all I know, you can still get them.
Yeah.
But it's actually that for a Louis L'Amour reader, those would not be a bad place to start. They're kind of cleaned up. They don't have some of the raunchier aspects. But that's fine too. But you find the version that somebody can get into based on where they are,
Yeah.
and then and don't have to push it. I mean, back in the day, okay, here we are sitting around the fire, and somebody's about to tell a story. If they're a good storyteller, they're going to look at the people on the other side of the fire and say, okay, these people do not, these are working guys. They're not going to want the flowery, fancy stuff, and so you're going to tell a good, lively tale in relatively simple language, and they're going to be going, yay, and they're going to love it. Okay, any good storyteller knows how to do that. So stuff for the young adults and older children's market is sometimes a very good place to start.
What about adults? What about adults?
No, but I mean, I'm talking about adults. I'm talking.
Okay, I got you.
If you're 54 years old, and you don't have a lot of background in this stuff, young adult novels of young adult retellings of Nora Smith are a fine place to start. You can get into them.
Yeah.
They'll make sense to you, and then once you've read that stuff in the simplified version, you go into the Volsunga Saga, and you already know what's going on.
Yeah.
You know the story, so it's a lot easier to figure it out.
Gotcha.
In the same way, you can read some version of the Grail story.
Yeah.
And then you can go back to the originals, and you already know what's happening. You know who the characters are. And so you're not lost. You're not just wading through this sea of words trying to go, where am I, and where are the characters, and what the heck is going on?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
That's a great idea. I wish I would have thought of that. I did it. I mean, I like to read, and I was interested in this stuff anyway, so it was easy for me, but I had to read a lot of it. But what I did is I read I don't know if you're familiar with Hilda Davidson. H.R. Davidson.
Yeah.
So I read several of her books, Stephen Pollington, a lot of these, academics, though, that really got you into the mindset of the Germanic people in the time. And then once I got a feel for how their culture was structured, what their belief system was, their worldview to the extent that we can know it, then when I went back to Beowulf and these sagas, it's like it's almost like I know what they're thinking. Like I know why he had to say certain things that he did, or why he couldn't back down in certain situations, or why he was obligated to do certain things that maybe he didn't want to do, because I understood the milieu that these stories were written in. But I mean, hell's bells, man. If I would have did it your way, that would have been a hell of a lot faster, man.
It's just one of those things. And the thing is, I've as a teacher in the Druid scene, I've had to help people into Celtic mythology that way. Because I mean, some Celtic mythology is very readable. Some of it is just incredibly weird, and you have no idea what's going on because it's layer on layer of cryptic symbols. And so, you want to start with don't just plunge straight into the Mabinogion. Start with Evangeline Walton's retelling of it. It's much easier.
I got you.
And so on. The thing is, there's a lot, especially if you go into the really old fantasy writers, people like William Morris, like Paul Anderson. Some of them did really first-rate retellings of this stuff. And so, and then because they're good stories.
Well, what do you think? What do you think about someone starting out with Lord of the Rings with Tolkien stuff?
Well, if you can handle plunging straight into the trilogy, do it. Some people bog down. I know people who bog down on like chapter 3. But if you are the kind of reader who looks at a 500 page, 1,500 pages ahead of you and goes, "Let me at it," then go in there. By the way, Tolkien did a translation of Beowulf. If you have not read it, you should.
Yes, I have heard. Yeah, it's on my list. I've
got it. It's one of the two Beowulf translations that I keep, and it's got good footnotes and everything. And so
that's good. Yeah, I'll definitely check that one out.
Tolkien is good. Another one a little older than Tolkien, William Morris, The Well at the World's End. I don't think I've met very few people who even remember it these days. But that's a grand. It's written in a kind of oldie-fashioned sort of. It's a Victorian fantasy. I mean, William Morris was the guy who invented modern fantasy fiction,
Yeah.
And but The Well is the World's End. It's kind of long, and it's more or less a Grail story in its own odd way.
Hmm.
But it's got all the kind of things we're talking about. And Morris was the guy who first translated the Volsunga Saga in English. He had the help of an Icelandic friend of his.
Oh, really?
But he was crazy about the Old Norse sagas.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, he was deeply, and he did a lot of novels. He's the reason why so much of our fantasy fiction these days has straight swords with cross hilts and chainmail and all the other
Yeah.
fixtures of the Viking Age.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
but yeah,
Yeah.
there's a lot of good stuff out there, and
Yeah.
that will kind of help get you into the mindset and so on. And you can also, again, if you don't mind, put it in a brown paper cover if you don't want people seeing this. But if you did not grow up with Grimm's fairy tales, go ahead and read them anyway.
Yeah. 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 Highly
Especially,
recommend.
when they get to the cannibalism and the other fun stuff like that, you'll be fine.
Yeah. You've reached the age of maturity. You can handle it.
Exactly.
Well, John, man, thank you so much for coming on.
You're welcome.
It just really enjoyed
I had a good
talking
time.
to you. Before we go, what's what kind of projects? Do you have anything new coming out that you want to tell us about?
Always,
Yeah.
always. Let's see. In terms of new stuff coming out, let's see. What do I have? What I have currently in the works? I have a number of things in my esoteric end of things.
Hmm.
I have just recently had all of my the peak oil books that were no longer being made available in print form. Those are all out again.
Oh, good.
They are all in print again. So all that's back out, and I'm looking at doing some other stuff in there, but most of what I've been doing recently has either been in the occult end of things or in my fiction. I've been doing
Yeah.
a lot of novels recently,
Yeah.
but I do have an eye toward some other possible. It's not as the Western civilization has stopped declining,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
I have more
There's
things to say. I'll have more things to say about that, but that's still under development.
sure. Sure. Yeah. That's one that's rich in material and being added to daily.
Adding to it every day. Oh,
Yeah.
good Lord, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, hang
Yeah.
on. Yeah, hang on. Here we go. Whee!
Well, without going down another rabbit trail, I think, and we've kind of mentioned that too. I think that's why these stories are so powerful and they're still
Hmm.
with us because
Hmm.
many of these are dealing with stories that take place in an age of decay and
Yeah,
a
yeah.
loss of virility and strength
Hmm.
and the sickness in the land. Those motifs.
Hmm.
The sickness in
Hmm.
the land physically, but that's a spiritual symptom.
Hmm.
And I think that's why they're so appropriate and so needed now that we return to these because we will be, I mean, we are living in those
We're
times again.
we're living in the wasteland. We're living
Yeah.
in the land, waiting for somebody to ask the right questions.
Yeah. Right. That's great. John, thank you so much. Where would be the
Thank
best
you for
place
having me on.
if people want to follow you and
Okay.
find out more?
My blog is www.ecosophia.net, ecosophia.net. I also have a Dreamwidth journal at ecosophia.dreamwidth.org. Your favorite online or off bookstore can easily get all of my books, and there are of course more of those coming out. And whether you like whether you like or don't like the esoteric stuff, there's plenty to choose from.
Yeah, yeah. And you're very active on your blog, like, or I should say very
Oh yeah.
interactive with your blog, like
Oh
with
yeah,
your
yeah.
readers and stuff, aren't you?
Oh yeah, no, I've usually when I put up a post on my blog and people for that week, because I do one post a week every Wednesday, and for that week, people ask questions or make comments. If they direct it to me, I'll respond to them.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah, I've
that's
noticed that. Yeah.
and the thing is, I don't understand why more writers don't do that, because that's a great way to keep in touch with your audience, to get a sense of what moves them, what's interesting to them, what turns them off. I like these conversations as a way of trying to get a sense of and sort of exchange going between myself and the people who are, after all, buying my books and paying my rent.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And you have a lot of readers. I mean, I've looked through the comments on
Oh
some
yeah,
of these posts and you're responding to a lot of people. I mean,
I get
that's
a, I get
very
a,
busy.
I get anything up to 150,000 unique paid views a month.
Yeah.
So I'm getting
Wow.
I'm getting a fair amount of business.
Yeah. That's
I'm
amazing. Well,
I'm happy.
Yeah, well, it's just a testament to all the work that you've put in over the years of
Mm,
researching and learning and really practicing and living this stuff out. So, and then
hmm
passing it on to others. So, I really
Thank you.
appreciate it. If you would stay on the line, we'll do an after
We can do it.
action wrap up. But anyway, guys, this was John Michael Greer talking about the myths and how to operationalize them in the life of the warrior if you're on the warrior path. I'm Mark. I'm signing off, telling you to stay sharp and keep it pearl snapped.